It's 71 degrees.
I'm Barry Gilreath, your host for Fabric of Family. Delighted that you have chosen to be with us for this program, this portion of the Gospel Broadcasting Network, a segment that is dedicated to focusing upon the subject of the family and looking at some of the issues and subjects that are related specifically to our families. I'm delighted to have with me today two very special guests. I have Leroy Dedman with me. Leroy, it's good to see you. Good to have you on this program. Leroy brings a number of years of experience in preaching the gospel. He is a gospel preacher, a father, a husband, and we're just delighted to have him with us. And we also have today on this program Chad Dollahite, who is a regular on Fabric of Family. He assists me on a regular basis, and I'm thankful to have him as well. We're going to be talking about today, brethren, the subject of how we can raise our children to be godly children. And I think those who are watching this program today certainly have an interest in seeing that their children are raised up to be godly young men and young women. And, you know, as we think about the Bible, does the Bible offer us any suggestions or any commandments or give us any advice whereby we can implement certain principles into the fashion by which we are striving to raise our children that can help to ensure that those children are going to be godly children?
Absolutely. One of the primary passages that comes to mind thinking about this is in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 and 7. It reads, "And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up." It's kind of like saying at all times, basically. Teaching our children, constantly working. Of course, Ephesians 6:4 comes to mind. Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord.
All right, so what does that mean, putting it in very practical terms? I mean, someone reading that passage, how would that apply to them personally?
Well, it's the idea of, as parents, on a constant basis, we're teaching, we're training, we're looking for every opportunity to teach a lesson, especially, I enjoy object lessons as a student and as a teacher, being a parent. I enjoy the object lessons because I learn best from those, and I think many times our children learn best from those. But ever looking for opportunities to teach and bring our children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord.
So are you then suggesting that it is actually the role of parents to raise their children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord?
Absolutely.
It's not the responsibility of the church?
Well, you took the words out of my mouth. That's what I was about to say. That many times the misunderstanding is that it is the responsibility of the church. Sometimes some people think it's the responsibility of the public school system to make sure your children grow up disciplined and well-behaved. But oftentimes, even in the Lord's church, we sometimes say, well, you know, the youth group's not active enough. That youth group doesn't do much, or I'm upset because the guy that works with our youth is not doing enough, and my children, I'm worried that I'm losing my children. But ultimately, biblically, God gives that responsibility of bringing children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord to parents. It belongs to them.
Well, does the church have any role whatsoever in helping to assist, I suppose, in rearing our children?
Church reinforces what the parents teach. And of course, you know, when you think about, say, a family would be what we would consider very faithful, so they're going to be at the church 3 hours a week, and parents that expect the church to take over those 3 hours and do for their children what they're supposed to do is going to wake up one day and wonder what happened to my children. Because if they're not taught right at home, then going to church, quote unquote, is probably going to at some point make the children wonder what it's all about, because they're not seeing it at home, they're not hearing it at home, and there's nothing to reinforce when they get there. They're just not being taught properly.
Well, I think we live in a society today where, as a general rule, we want other people to do things for us. We expect that. The government is expected to do certain things. The school system is expected to do certain things. And if we're not careful as parents, sometimes we can have those same expectations concerning our children. And we can say, well, it is the job, the role, the responsibility of the church to make sure my children grow up to be Christians. Well, the church may assist us as parents in that process, but the responsibility is not given to the church. The responsibility is given to those who oversee that particular home, which would be the father and the mother. Now, what about this idea, though, sometimes we hear where a parent says, well, you know, I'm not going to make my child go to the church assembly. I'm not going to require that my child be involved in any activities perhaps that are offered through the church, because I just feel like that if you make a child do something like that, it's going to put a bad taste in their mouth, and when they get older and they're able to decide what they're going to do, they're never going to want to darken the doors of a church assembly again.
Well, we don't think that way in other areas of life. And of course, to train up a child means just that. When the child's young, you set the right example, you point them the right way, you get them growing straight, and you have to do that by, quote, making them in that sense. My children did not always want to take a bath, and they didn't always want to brush their teeth. But I checked the cost of dental care and realized that it was important for them to brush their teeth on a regular basis. And now that they're older, they still brush their teeth. And we need to understand that children need to be made to do things. Discipline is probably one of the greatest problems we have in the home today. In fact, I was thinking the other day, one of the problems in the home is also the problem in the church. We have the children running the home. I mean, all you have to do is be around families. I'm not saying all families. Chad has good children, well-behaved children. I have great-grandchildren, so I've been through it 2 or 3 times. But I know this, that if you're not careful, your children will be the one who controls where you eat, where you go, when you come home. I was at Walmart the other day, and a little boy wanted a toy, and the mother said, no, you can't have that toy. Well, he laid down on the floor and kicked and screamed, and I wanted to pick the child up and just look him straight in the eye and say, did you not hear your mother? She said, no. Well, before I could do anything, which I probably wouldn't have done anything anyway, the mother said, oh, well, okay, you can have it. Then I wanted to pick her up, look her straight in the eye, and say, did you not hear the word no? So, you know, our children control. And I think sometimes even in the church, we forget that God is the Father, and He is the rule maker, and we're to follow His lead. And now we're His children, and we're wanting to set the rules, and we want to do it our way. So I think the same problem exists both ways.
Well, if you want to know why there are some problems within the church today concerning authority in the church, a lot of this goes back to authority in the home. If children are not taught to respect authority in the home while they grow up, then why are they going to respect authority in the church when they get older? I heard one young person talk about, when he was a teenager, he used to talk about how that he had a drug problem. He said, I was drugged to church on Sunday morning. I was drugged to church on Sunday night. I was drugged to church on Wednesday night. I was drugged to church for vacation Bible school. He said, I was also drugged to the woodshed a few times. He said, I had a drug problem. He said, but those drugs are still in my veins. and they have an influence upon what I do now as an adult. I think we can relate to that, can we not? We were made to do certain things as a child that at the time we didn't value, at the time we didn't appreciate. If we'd had our say-so about it, we wouldn't have done it. But now that we're older, we can look back and we can say, I am so thankful that my mother, my father, whoever it may have been, grandmother, grandfather, made me to do those very things. Chad?
Absolutely. And, you know, as you mentioned, authority, it's no wonder that there's a problem with authority in the church and people understanding that, because there oftentimes is authority lacking in the home. And I remember so many times as a child, you know, the old, you know, children tend to ask why, and mom or dad saying, because I say so, and because I'm your dad, you're my son, I'm in charge. And I've learned even as a father now that children test that very early. And even very early in life, they're going to form a picture of authority, whether it is authoritative or not, based on mom and dad, because they, you know, children, even before they understand right from wrong, they test that authority, and they want to say no or yes when you say no, and they want to say no when you say yes.
Is it wrong for us to say, because I said so to our kids? Are we obligated to provide an explanation every time our child says, well, why?
Well, I don't know that we're obligated. There might be times when it's helpful. I know there were a few times when my mother and father may have explained to me why, but I grew up in the area that Chad just mentioned. When Dad said do it, I knew I had to do it because he said do it. Now, if there are good reasons for it, and if you want to explain things to your children, I think that's helpful. But if they're going to learn authority, then they need to learn to do what you say because you said it.
Yeah, and because if we think about, parallel that to the church as we get older and we make that decision to enter into the church, there are going to be times in which we don't understand why God may tell us to do something. You know, are we at liberty during those times to say, well, God, I don't understand it, so I'm not going to do what you said.
Well, it's just like baptism, for example. Before I became a Christian, I might question, why do I need to do that? And people just often say, well, you need to do it because the Bible says do it. Well, if you recognize authority, that's all you need. If God says do it, then you need to do it, regardless of why. And there are situations where we might find out why, studying the Bible, but it's not necessary to know why to be obedient and submissive.
Well, there's situations where I tell my children, you know, I don't want you riding your bike in the road because a car might come along and hit you. And so, as Leroy mentioned, sometimes you're going to give a reason. You know, sometimes my mom would say, you're going to make your bed every morning because that teaches you a good habit of leaving things orderly and decent. But then there are other times that, you know, as you mentioned, you just learn the basic principle of authority that you're going to do something because I said so. And sometimes it would come down to that. You know, parents ask you to do something, and I remember growing up, I would just say, this doesn't make sense. I don't see any reasoning for this. And ultimately, mother would just say, well, you know, I don't care if you see a reason for it. You're the child, and you are obligated to do, based on the principle of authority, what I tell you to. And so, based on that, you have to do it or face the consequences.
You know what Leroy was saying a little while ago about how that in some homes the children rule the roof, or rule the roost, I should say. I thought about what I'd heard one time. It goes a little bit along this line. It's not he or she who wears the pants in the family that rules the family. It's he or she that wears the diaper in the family that oftentimes rules the family. And, you know, that's a humorous way of saying that, but nevertheless, I do think that is a valid point that we as parents need to remember is who is it that's in the position of authority? Who is it that's going to make those hard and tough rules that sometimes need to be made? Are we as a parent going to accept that responsibility, or are we going to let our child, if they whine enough, if they cry enough, if they pitch a big enough fit, are we going to allow them to determine what they're going to do and what they're not going to do? These things may seem very minor, as we think about things such as, well, is the child going to get that particular item that the child wanted that Leroy was referencing earlier, that the mother eventually gave in. It may seem minor, but we need to understand this has a cumulative effect, and this kind of behavior taking place over and over and over again is eventually going to have an effect upon that child as they grow older, and it might be they want a toy today, and when they're 17, 18 years old, they pitch a fit because they want that brand new car. And this can continue to follow them for the rest of their life. So children need to learn no. It's okay to say yes sometimes, but it's also okay to say no. Well, what can we do as parents then to teach our children to respect authority? What are some things we can do to help our children learn to respect authority?
Well, I think the teach authority that you mentioned, or for them to learn authority, involves teaching. In other words, if you're going to learn something, that means somebody's teaching you. And the Bible uses words like that: bring them up, train them, teach them. And those words depict responsibility on your part and my part as parents. Because when the child's born, he doesn't have any knowledge of responsibility. And he starts out demanding all of your attention, and you do everything for him. He can't change his diaper, he can't feed himself, he can't do anything. When he cries, the whole family's right there by the crib. But at some point, if you don't get away from that, he's still going to be crying when he's 10, 15 years old, and the whole family's going to be right there at the crib. Because you have to teach responsibility.
Children, I read this somewhere, it's not original with me, but going back to what you mentioned just a second ago and what Brother Leroy was mentioning also, I read somewhere that a lot of children today have a vitamin N deficiency, and that N stands for no. They don't ever hear the word no. And sometimes it may be a fit. It may just be that they're so spoiled rotten that they don't ever hear it, period. But it may be that they hear it and they throw a fit and the mom changes her mind or the dad changes his mind. But like you say, we got to let our children learn the value of not always getting what you want. Sometimes that instills in us a desire to work a little harder to try to get it. But that vitamin N deficiency is there in many times in many homes today.
Well, even if they hear no, and if you don't mean no, or if you're going to change your mind later, at some point they're going to say, well, when Chad says no, or when Daddy says no, he really does not mean no. He means for me to cry a while or to beg a while. But at some point he's going to change the no to yes. And I've always told parents, if you mean to say no and stick by it.
Right.
But if you don't mean to say no, say yes at the beginning.
Right.
And I think the Bible teaches that principle in other areas. Let your yea be yea and your nay be nay, basically, would be saying the same thing. And one thing that I've found through the years, and of course I've been here more years than you, but the Bible principles of daily living and of things that guide me as a Christian apply to the home. These same principles, how to treat one another, do good one to another, the golden rule as we sometimes call it, and all of those things, they apply to the home just as well as they do in any other area of our life. The Bible is our guidebook in all areas. We don't need these child rearing books to teach us some of the things, because the Bible's already taught us. And we just need to pay attention to those principles.
Well, those are some good points, and I want to thank Leroy, you for being with us, and Chad, for you contributing to this program today. And I want to thank those of you who are watching this program at home today. And we hope that some of the things that have been discussed today can help you as a parent or grandparent or whoever you may be to deal with children and to use those opportunities that are given to you to raise and nurture those children in the love and admonition of the Lord. Until next time, I'm Barry Gilreath wishing you a great day.
Let's 1. Speech on. Accessories and scene 2. Living music selected. Screen recording button. Calculate timer button. Calculate timer select music selected.